Women who worked at Hooters, Twin Peaks, or other restaurants where the waitresses are expected to wear revealing uniforms. Did you like it? How was your experience? I was briefly, approximately 6 months, employed at Hooters about a decade ago in college. The uniform was uncomfortable mostly due to the weather. It was autumn/winter, and with it being baseball playoffs and football season, the clientele could get pretty rowdy and the comments could be unpleasant, but the tips made up for it. I waited tables for a long time, and I've never made that much money consistently. I'm talking $500, and on a Tuesday and I was the first cut. I worked at Twin Peaks. It was weird. We weren't allowed to order off the customer menu and had to order off a spa menu that featured super low-calorie options. I also got docked once because my hair wasn't glam enough. I'd straightened it instead of curling it one day. Not sure how I got the job to begin with, because they only have one size pair of shorts for you to try on in the interview, and they were about 3 sizes too small. I think you answered your own question. It was actually super unflattering. My stomach and love handles were spilling over, giving me a bad muffin top, and I was almost too mortified to walk out. I wasn't overweight, but corporate did have a preferred figure when it came to sizing that wasn't realistic when it came to actually hiring people. Maybe management knew that and took into account that I'd look better once I bought my own. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but when I was in elementary school, my parents, my cousin and I had to eat at some restaurant on vacation BC. Everywhere else had an agonizing wait, and my cousin needed chicken tenders ASAP. All I remember is my dad never looking up from the table, my mom looking very sad and not eating, and the waitress's muffin top. I, a little kid with no filter, asked her why she didn't get a bigger skirt, and she looked like she was gonna cry. It's been like 20 to 25 years, but I still think about it a couple times a year and feel super bad. I hope she is doing well. This sounds like a scene in Malcolm in the Middle. I could imagine Hal having a nervous breakdown. My poor dad. For all his faults, he can be a real jerk. He was a fantastic girl dad because he always held women in very high regard and not in a patronizing/protective way. Like, when I was a teenager, he fully supported me wearing whatever I as an individual wanted to wear. It was the early zeros. Objectively, I was dressed like a hoe, but the exploitation of women's bodies for profit was upsetting to him. And my poor mom, she was 6 feet tall, in her 40s, and on a perpetual diet. She wasn't fat, but was very much an elder boomer woman who was happy in her Alfred Dunner pantsuits until faced with what she lost. Looking back, I wonder if this is why she seemed to hate me when I was a teenager. She always said looked like a petite version of her W a better nose. Anyway, as a parent who has taken young kids on vacation and waited way too long for a table, I now understand that my parents dined in hell that summer evening. Did Twin Peaks for 2 years. The uniform didn't bother me, used to dance competitively, so I was comfortable in revealing clothes. What got to me was having to be on all the time, even when dealing with disrespectful customers. Left for bartending instead. Dude here who worked at Hooters. Dishwasher, and then fry cook. Uniform was a Hooters t-shirt. It would get soaked with sweat from the radiating heat of 7+ deep fryers, caked up with flour and raw chicken from breading the wings, and by the end of an 8-hour shift, I looked more like a breaded chicken wing than a 17-year-old male. I did not get laid. I worked for a private catering company in college. We dressed professionally slutty and served food to these wealthy folks who part of a private beach club. Comments were outrageous, but so were the tips. Also, lots of swingers and woof, the drama was amazing. I worked at Hooters part-time. It was kinda like a minefield lol, but you could get pretty big tips if you have regulars. I did, briefly at a place with Velcro Scottish skirts. I'm attractive, but my friend who is Helen of Troy level got me the job. I've recently lost my first post-college job in my field. In spite of the Scottish theme, the boss must not have liked redheads BC. I was the only one, and I was given a skirt nearly twice as long as the other girls. At the time, I was pretty self-conscious about that. I would put the skirt on and sing, "I went to college every day." I ended up chatting it up with a customer who ultimately hired me back into my actual career, where I have since been successful. I worked at Hooters for like a year and a half when I was in between college and med school, and part of med school. Part of the uniform is thick brown leggings, so to be honest, it felt more like wearing a tank top with leggings and shorts over that. I will say, they run a tight freaking ship, Hooters of America. Can't speak to any of the franchises. A restaurant could be either. They have very high standards for their waitresses, to the point when I picked up a shift at a local independent restaurant my husband worked at when I was a resident, I made fantastic money, at least compared to what I was used to making as a resident, and was mentioned in a Google review. To be honest, people were sometimes really mean more than they were pervy. A non-insignificant number of guys seemed to want to be mean as sort of some revenge against the hot chick from their high school, but I wasn't the hot chick from their high school. I actually applied for the job because I was so shy I had trouble talking to people, and I decided to fix it by being thrown into the deep end. People were also very condescending, and acted like we were extremely stupid, but most of the girls were great local college students. I think the saddest I've ever seen anyone is when I told a man wearing a Phi Beta Kappa pin, "Ow, I'm a member of that." I was also surprised it was much family-friendly than I had expected. Hooters' ideal is girl next door, so you can only have natural hair colors, 2 lobe piercings in each ear, though people could get away with this one more than some of the others, especially since you have to wear your hair down, tattoos must be covered, and I had to give up my nose stud during my year and a half. There's coloring pages, hula hoops, etc. for kids to play with, and honestly, it's a bunch of college girls, so any baby or kid brought in is the star of the restaurant because everyone wants to play with them. We once had a 12-year-old girl making beaded bracelets at one table, and every single girl I think stopped by to ask about it and see what she was doing. But I would say it is somewhere I would be totally fine or happy to bring my kids, especially because it's supposed chaotic in there, and no one cares about the kids dropping fries on the floor. One woman I would see there fairly regularly, I think, was a caseworker for CPS, and would bring the kids there for lunch for their check-in. I actually think it's a great idea, because if they had like a history of being sexually abused by an older man, Hooters is a pretty safe place in terms of being a public place, and all the workers around you are young women. I worked for the Tilted Kilt when I was 18. I made great money compared to my college peers, but that was pretty much the only positive out of the experience. Dudes were gross, but you kind of go in expecting that. The worst part for me was actually the other girls. I was very fit and attractive at the time, in a situation where being attractive determined things like how good of a section you got at work, so all these other attractive girls were in constant catty competition with each other. I got this bullied out of me. It got so bad that one of them roofied me at a party, because it was funny. Then they did it to another girl at work because they were mad at her, and the cops ended up being called because she made a scene. I was one of the first females hired as a general manager at Hooters in the early 90s. They needed me when Hooters was sued by men for discrimination, and they wanted it to look like they had females in management spots when 60 Minutes came to do the interview. When managers interviewed girls for employment, they would circle in a letter in the word employment on the application. If they considered her a 1, circle in the E. If she was a 10, circle in the T. Best friend worked at Hooters for about a year. She said the uniform sucked, especially here in Canada when it gets cold, and the clientele could be huge red flags, but the tips were excellent. I think she said the most tips she ever pulled in one night was around $450, and she quit after a year because she was fed up with being grabbed so much. I worked at a Hooters at a beach location for 2 summers. The managers were all creepy men who were trying to get sexual favors from the waitresses. They made sexual and derogatory comments to us. We had an after-work party once, and one of the kitchen guys drove me home. The next morning at our daily startup meeting, I was asked in front of everyone, he gave you a ride home and you couldn't even give him a hand job. The place was almost always packed and sometimes had a 2-hour wait. I didn't mind the uniforms because I was young and in the prime of my life. I felt confident and hot. I made a lot of money, and those summers were really fun. Overall, the people who ate there were a real mix of families, teenagers, some horny dudes, but the management was worse than any customer. Do you have any experience with going to or working at Hooters? Feel free to share in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing for more daily uploads.